Enrique is here, and Jesse and Sarah. Jason is obviously here. And what we'll do is Jason will give his presentation, which is an overview. Obviously, there's a lot in the dissertation to try to get into it. I suggested about a 20-minute presentation. So he'll give some pointers through the presentation into what he's been doing. And then we'll have, if there are any questions or thoughts from everyone present, and then we'll ask everyone except the committee to leave, and then we'll continue our discussion with Jason.
Thank you for coming from Salt Lake City, being here with us in person. Sorry you couldn't make it, Dr. Oliver, but I appreciate the work that you've done as well. For sure, my two boys being here mean a lot to me, and part of the research is sort of understanding that sort of relationship, and so for them to be here is really fitting for me. My father, who is also part of the dedication and sort of driving force behind it, was supposed to be here, but due to unforeseen circumstances, he couldn't, but he's here with me in spirit. Two colleagues that we started with in 07 are here, and I appreciate y'all being here, so I appreciate that. As Dr. O'Malley said, it's going to be a brief overview of it. There was a lot of data to sort of go through and analyze, but for our sakes, maybe we could just sort of touch the key points on it. I've been sick for 4 days, coughing up a fit. I didn't have a voice until yesterday, so forgive me if I don't sound like my normal self, or if I cough or what have you. Come on now. There we go. Young states that above all, postcolonialism seeks to intervene to force its alternative knowledges into the power structures. Wait, oops. Wrong one. Sorry. Course or nepotism, chow, of course, is a process in which those who are marginal to the mainstream Western culture are expected to resemble and replicate the very preconceptions that have appended them, to objectify them in accordance with already seen, and to this authenticate the images of them as ethnics. Asher talks about this reifying stereotypic images of themselves that marginalize the Tejano fathers. For this study, when I did the lit review, I found a lot of information on Chicana mothers and her role within the educational journey of her kids. What I found was a major gap in the area of the Tejano father. For me, the significance of this research is to start to begin to close that gap. My argument, stated in the form of this study, is that we as Tejano fathers do hold the agency and power to create our own narrative of who we are, what our role is with our children, and how schools can strengthen the connection between the home and the school. The primary question as written there is, how does the Tejano father in his own terms fit into the role of the educational journey of his children? You can read the secondary questions there, which get at bridging the formal school system with the Tejano home, the impact of the socio-historical events on the identity formation of the Tejano father, and then really doing a deep analysis of the hybrid identity of the Tejano father. For my lit review, I had 4 strands, but I'm only, because of time, going to go over 2 of them today. The 2 that I am not going to go over was sort of a socio-historical review of Mexican-American literature. Let's see. The second one is on parent education, parent involvement, excuse me. I did sort of a traditional paradigm of what that means in the literature, and then I went deeper into what it means for Latino parents to be involved. The 2 that I wanted to talk about was my theoretical framework, which I think is sort of the foundation of the research study. Now I can talk about Young, which states that the postcolonialism seeks to intervene to force alternative knowledges into the power structures, to challenge the way people think, the way we behave, to produce a more just and equitable relationship between the different people of the world. For Stuart Hall, he says, so postcolonialism is really not the end of colonization. It's merely a new kind of colonialism after a certain high imperialism and colonial occupation. It's in the wake of it, the shadow of it, It's inflected by it. It is what it is because something before happened, but it's also something new. Ahmed explains how the post-colonial era disrupts the identity of two cultures who meet through the very process of hybridization. The meeting of those two transform into something new. Hall explains that within the relationship between you and the other is how identity is formed. You alone cannot form your own identity. And for Bahaba, individuals and communities craft these hybrid identities and cultures by synthesizing the difference between the two cultures that they might find themselves in between. For my methods, I conducted 3 case studies. Each case study consisted of a father and son team. The sons were in their 30s and the fathers ranged from anywhere between 55 and 70. It's not working for me. I used platicas or informal conversations with each individual team. A socio-historical walk was conducted with each team, which meant that I physically and emotionally traveled with the teams back to their places of origin.
Try the space more. There you go.
For my analysis, I did a thematic analysis in which I took each case individually, case 1, case 2, and case 3. I was going ahead, sorry. Can't make it easy, can you?
It's just how it is.
And then I did a cross-case analysis across all 3 cases. My father and I, for reasons to be discussed later, were one of the 3 cases. And the major themes that sort of bubbled to the surface after when I got into it were background, school experience, becoming dad, and the next generation. So all of my analysis was in those sort of 4 pockets for each of the groups. You'll see later that the 3rd case, which is my father and I, turned out differently than I anticipated through the methods, and I adjusted with that, and I'll go into more to deeper analysis of that in a minute. For the Valenzuela case, this was in Kingsville. They're all from Kingsville. 4 generations of men who inhabited Kingsville before it was even a city. The school experience was, the father, because of his father's struggles, felt the need to assimilate quickly and heavily to the white mainstream society and educational system. And with that came this really blend of very strong gender roles and expectations in the house and in the community, in which the father was the father and the mother did mother things. And it was just understood that that was it. But with the son now, who's in his mid-30s, has really prospered because of, they believe, because of this sort of quick assimilation at an early generation, at the 2nd generation, and is now financially and educationally better off than any of the first 3, but has had to redefine himself because the shift in the continuum of that hybrid identity, the in-betweenness that he resided in. For the Lopez case, my case number 2, this was a father and son team who grew up together just outside of Kingsville in a very small rural town that was multi-generational family structure, which meant that they had both sets of grandparents living literally on the same plot of land. And the influence of those 2, especially the 2 grandfathers, onto the father and son team were very profound. The school experience for them was this notion of what Gonzalez, Moll, and Amante taught, the funds of knowledge, of gathering information and learning experiences wherever it is that they are in space, in what space they are, whether it be at the home, at the store, within the community. Becoming dad was this real push. The father was very determined to teach the family values and norms as opposed to formal education, and really relied heavily on that. Excuse me. This idea of teaching good morals and respect for others, is that it talks about, was really in line with the father's view of how he should play a role in his son's experience. The son in this team is the only son to not be a father himself, and he was quite convinced that assimilating to this side of the continuum, being the American side, was the way to go if and when he became a father. It was very adamant in that that's the right way of sort of succeeding. Now, my father and I really had all the intention of doing the methods exactly the way that his was actually the last one. I did the first two first, and when I got there that weekend, I was going to spend the whole weekend with him. I had all intention of playing it the way I had, but participating as well with him. What ended up happening was I didn't participate with him at all. I treated him as sort of the participant, and I was the researcher. Now, because of that, in the spirit of St. Pierre, who talks about this nomadic inquiry, is that I was compelled to rethink myself, my role, and reconfigure my place and my ground of not only as a son, but as a researcher. It was really a profound moment after the fact of knowing what I had to do, what I had done, and how to respond to that. Foucault speaks of in which power is always present, but continually mobile and modifying. The relationship that I have with my father is really not that different than what Foucault speaks of. Rather, it actually might be amplified with the addition of viewing it from a post-colonial lens and the cultural norms found within the Mexican-American family. Reflecting on the relationship that he and I maintain, prior to and during the process of this study, issues of post-colonialism, of power and culture inserted themselves into the process and created a significant impact on the methods of this case. I didn't know that prior to inserting him and I into the participant pool, but in hindsight, I didn't find an autoethnographic piece during my literature review that really looked at the Latino issues coinciding with the post-colonial lens. And so for me, that was really an aha, sort of the light going off of why he and I were within the study. In the spirit of Ellis and Bachner, I was forced to pull back on these multiple layers of consciousness to better understand the data collected, the implementation of it, the analysis of it that I shared with my father. He and I went to a carrot field as part of the socio-historical walk, and as I walked in there with him, I realized for the first time in my life that his struggle was not my struggle. His oppression was not mine to claim. Rather, my place on the hybrid identity continuum shined as bright as the sun did on us that day. And it was really a moment to really understand this hybrid place that I resided in. He took me to an elementary school in which he spent 4 months out of each year because he migrated for the other 8. He spoke of the disconnect, missed opportunities, always playing catch up, and a system unwilling to reach out to his parents. And in many ways, he was really explaining my school experience as well. Yet I knew that I spent most of my youth imagining a new kind of colonialism while negotiating the past colonialism in which he resided. For me, this generated a crisis within the social fabric in which I often felt the need to just go to my room where I could just simply be me and not toil within the fabrics of two cultures. Again, this all sort of resonated with me after that weekend with him. My father was part of the generation of Tejanos whose language, as Gonzalez Molinamonti explained, shifted from Spanish to English, that interrupted, that actually fractured and extended the development of Spanish comprehension and literacy in reading and writing. Let me go again. For my dad and I, this notion of cultural literacy, both the importance of culture in literacy and literacy in culture, was one that followed me through the relationship with him. He and I, the shift in language, the entrenchment of assimilation, to push for him, for me to be literate more so than he, and the need for myself to prove to my father that I was both culturally and actually literally more literate in two cultures, has driven me to the point of this hybrid place in which I reside. For the cross case was three things really resonated with me. This incompatibility that the Tejano father and son has with the school system, in which the power dynamics of systems were in constant collision with each other. This impact of addressivity that the Tejano father has with the school system, in which if I am addressed as a Tejano father, how am I addressed, to whom is addressing me, and how do I respond to that address, and vice versa. The comfortable confines of La Educación, if you read the piece, that came up again and again and again, is this idea of the Tejano father finding a space, a safe space to educate his son through informal practices, taking him to work, doing construction work and doing math and science. We're talking about sharing stories with family and sort of weaving education into that. And this gap in understanding the Tejano hybrid identity from both parties, both the subject and the other, this notion of, okay, this assimilation that all three parties partook in, of really understanding the dynamic between, what does it mean to be Mexican American for myself, for my son, his educational experience, and really having this I think that they're aware that they reside within the hybrid space. I mean, that's really the sense that I got in researching the data. But to name it, and to tell you, I didn't talk about hybrid identity when I was talking about, when I was doing the pláticas, the semi-focused conversation, or the socio-historical walk. And so what I sensed was this, all three cases, this inability to name that space that they resided in. These get to these are the three secondary questions.
Did we lose him?
Sorry, Dr. Oliver.
He's up there.
No, he's not there.
Oh, I thought he was on that one.
No.
Thanks, Michelle.
You're welcome, sorry.
Should I stop or should I keep going?
We just give it a minute, because they'll probably be distracting you with that.
Yeah. I think this is my last slide. Oh, no, I have one more.
Thank you.
My voice.
No, sorry. I waited too long.
Computer technology. You good there, Clay? Big O.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Michelle. Welcome back, John.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I'm gonna start over.
Oh my! That's what I was thinking.
All on purpose.
Thanks, Luisito.
You're welcome.
The three bullets are aligned with the three secondary questions. So the duality of the son's identity was solidified within this framework of la educación received at home and their formal schooling within the classrooms of Kingsville. The bridge, or lack thereof, between the schooling done with the Tejano home and the formal schooling became a pillar of the results of this research study. The absence of such bridge can be attributed to lack of understanding of both structures by all parties involved, issues of addressivity, and the notion of knowledge in regards to how we educate or school. As far as the impact of socio-historical events, with the dawn of the Mexican Revolution in 1910, the mass migration of the Mexicans, either them crossing the border or the border crossing them. Prior to that, the birth of the contemporary Tejano sprouted from a socio-historical context that could be described as traumatic. Fleeing the violence of a revolution in their homeland, only to come to a place that was as much, if not more, violent. I lost my space. The events of the past century have solidified the notion of self and other within the Mexican and American identity that has yet to be fully understood or dealt with. The intervention set forth by the Tejano fathers of story, whether knowingly or unknowingly, sought to create a more just and equitable livelihood for their children. In doing so, the hybrid identity they shaped allowed for financial and formal schooling prosperity. It actually moved the Tejano sons of the Valenzuela, Lopez, and Aleman families further away, in some cases, from their Mexican cultural norms and values. There we go. And so his role, to get to the primary research question, is that there's this sense, as we spoke about, this sense of discomfort or disconnectedness from the formal schooling system that that continues to plague, no matter, regardless of the assimilation process in which, how heavy or how light they sort of delved into that, is still been persistent throughout the sons, and now my sons, and the other guy's sons, the other participants' sons' state of being. When it comes to identity, is this sense of self that is created through the lens of not only culture, assimilation, but also through the lens of how the school system views them, in particularly the fathers, and the impact of that had on their sons. Dr. O'Malley sort of introduced postcolonialism to me very early on in the process, and for me it was a learning experience in the sense that I had already begun to sort of set up the framework of chapters 1, 2, and 3, and to come after that, the postcolonialism, to find out how pervasive my own sense of postcolonialism and the colonized mind that I have, how pervasive that sort of infiltrated into every step, every stage of this study, including the analysis piece that was done after I had done tons of reading on it. So what I had to do was really negotiate my own sense of being the colonized and colonizer through this study. Implications for research is, as spoke about, for the most part, the idea of the father and his role within the educational system of his children is a very white, mainstream approach to a perspective. Hopefully, I hope this piece can really sort of open up that conversation to sort of fill that gap. Identity formation and the impact of postcolonialism and addressivity, I think, is also in its infancy stages when it comes to Latino and Chicano studies. For practice, this is really a message to school leaders to really better understand the asset that they have within the Tejano father and bridging that formal educational piece with the La Educación that's going on at home. For policy also is at a district level, at a campus level, really embracing first you have to understand it, embracing the notion of hybridity and biculturalism at a curriculum level, at a policy level, for the sake of the students. My voice is really about to go, and I appreciate everybody being here.
Hang on there, hang on.
That's convenient, just when we're about to ask questions.
I'm not taking any questions.
Sure you have a voice.
I for me, this project has been a very personal journey in delving into this idea of identity, culture, colonization. And I leave here, as should, probably with more questions than answers. But I hope that this process has begun to start a conversation to bridge that gap between the homes that we live in and the schools in which we go to every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Great. Aleman, congratulations, yes. Oh, we're filming, I see. Yeah, great work, thank you, yeah. Sure. No, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Congratulations. Exciting. Welcome.
Well, it's not done yet, I gotta sign.
Oh, that's right, that's right. We only have 2 committee member signatures.
Maybe for a Whataburger.
Not official yet.
For a free Whataburger or something.
Yes, you certainly have.
Just gonna write.
on that. There it is. So when do you want to have a beer? Right now? We can do it now. Yeah, I agree with that. I don't want to traffic.
You're on your way flying.
You don't need
out
one
here.
pen for each letter?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Another
I'm staying for the 3:15
Yeah, I'm gonna
defense.
go to spa. No, my next trip is to.
Can we take a picture? Is that possible?
Yeah, to
Sure.
Scotland.